All right, welcome back. So we're going to briefly discuss Barb and the personal story, which was Monday. It's important to note that with personal stories, we don't really have a lot of points to hit on. As far as questions from personal stories on exams will go, they will be very basic. If you were there and taking general notes, you should do very well on them. It's important to know some things that Barb talked about as they're going to recur in the class. So there are some key pieces that I wanted to draw your attention to, not necessarily for this exam, but maybe for application later on in the course as well. So again, as you're studying over Barb and her discussion, she talked about some important pieces, but if you were paying attention, we're not going to go into great detail. You know, maybe like an example of what we wouldn't do would be to ask you how many pills she takes a day, or what type of disease caused Logan, her son, to die, but much broader strokes will show up on the exams. But there are a couple of things that I mentioned we'd like you to be able to apply later. So I wanted to hit on those right now. One great thing about Barb is she talks about a lot of different pieces that we're going to discuss in the course. She talks about some of the fundamental pieces, the science about it. She talked about her CD4 count, and because Jake mentioned that today in class, let's talk about that for a moment as well. So we talked about CD4 positive cells being both macrophage and T helper cells. When we talk about CD4 counts, we're talking about T4 or CD4 positive T cells, and we know these are the T helper cells. So it's important to know that when we're talking about an AIDS definition, under 200 T cells is considered that you are an AIDS patient and not just an individual infected with HIV. So when your T cell count drops below 200 cells, and when we talk about that, we call them cells in 1 milliliter of blood that's sampled. So less than 200 CD4 positive T helper cells indicates that you are an AIDS patient. So Barb did mention that hers dropped below that to 70. You don't have to remember that number specifically, but just know that as a patient and as someone living with HIV, you're very aware of some of these pieces of science that we're talking about in the way that you are dealing with your disease and understanding it. So I thought that was a great illustration of some of the more hard science stuff as it comes to play in the talks that we're going to have even with our guest lecturers. Hey, there we go. Relax. Disregard what I just said. So let's talk about some other pieces of Barb. We talk about long-term survivorship of HIV. In the first lecture, the introduction lecture by Dr. Jacobs, he talked about the progression of HIV. So when you're infected with HIV, it takes about 10 years if you're not treated with medication to progress to AIDS. And after you progress to AIDS, after that 10 years, typically on average, life expectancy is about 2 years. So when we talk about long-term survivors of HIV, it's those individuals that haven't progressed to AIDS in 10 years. Where Barb has progressed to AIDS, she is a long-term survivor of AIDS as she's lived past the 2-year average for individuals. This average is much skewed now that individuals are living longer, because we know that if we can find infected individuals early enough and treat them, that life can be prolonged for a long amount of time, and relatively healthy and normal life is an option now. Again, this is a bit of a tangent, sorry, I'm going to bring it back in. So we talk about characteristics that are common to individuals that are long-term survivors. And obviously working with a physician and being involved in your health care is an important piece that we're going to discuss going forward. Some pieces of Barb's discussion that really highlight this were working with her physician. She got fired from one physician because he wouldn't really let her take an active role in her health care and her health decisions. But she said she waited and found and looked around until she found a physician that can be that can work together with her in combating her disease. She also talked about how she took control of her insurance company and really pestered them until she got the right coverage in order to make sure she had the right medication for her family, herself, and the right treatment.
Many people would just give up. They would say, okay, well, the insurance company's not going to cover it, so I'll just do what you know, I'll do what I can. Or no, then not even that. I get what I get, and that's it's not a good way to be when you're dying. So you definitely want to take control of it, and this is a repeating theme that we're going to see long-term survivors.
Yeah. And another example with Barb was the drug trials. She was engaged in drug trials herself. Even with Logan, she got Logan into drug trials that he really wasn't cleared for. She discussed that she was able to grind up pills from a trial and give them to him. One of the pieces of Barb's lecture too was her outlook. She said that she was not going to turn into a skeleton person, in her own words. You know, she talked about the reaction of some of her family members, but realized that it was not something that happened to her, I think she said, but something that she could use to affect change. So her infection, she looks at it not as a negative, but a positive in her life that she is able to do something with now. Where I'm sure she had some down about it, but the positive outlook that Barb has is consistent among individuals that are involved in long-term survivorship, essentially, right? Another piece was the way that she contracted HIV. So Barb contracted HIV from her husband, who was cheating on her. Specifically, he was cheating with another man.
More men.
More men, yeah. Like multiple cheating was going on. It was interesting because Barb said, never in a million years, am I doing that? Sorry about that, guys. Never in a million years would I think that my husband was cheating on me. And when she did, she said she was shocked. But the takeaway from that was that well, in her own words, she said she wished people had been more understanding to him, or had enabled him, or the people around him would have been able to embrace and accept the fact that he was a homosexual individual, a gay man, whereas she feels like stigma against homosexuality really served to drive his behaviors underground, or outside of her knowledge, right? So that she was at an at-risk situation, right? We talked about HIV being spread primarily in the U.S. through MSM, or homosexual men who sleep with men, right? Whereas in the world it's not, it's heterosexual contact, but in the U.S. we have a lot of MSM, or homosexual men transmitting the disease. So it kind of is an important illustration of the way that things look in the U.S., and also of down-low behavior, of men who are engaged in sleeping with other men behind their wife or their girlfriend, or their back, right, without their knowledge. So if we know that most of or a good portion of the HIV is transmitted in the U.S. through MSM behavior, and we know that MSM behavior is stigmatized, then individuals are not going to be forthcoming with what is a high-risk behavior. And we'll see through a number of individuals that come in and speak at the class that these women are at risk because people are not necessarily accepting of an MSM or a homosexual male's lifestyle, and the stigma drives behaviors underground. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go forward as well. Anything else on Barb?
No.
Yeah, again, review. If you took notes, again, it's not going to be extremely deep when we talk about information from Barb. But it is a great reference. As we talk about a lot of things in class, we'll bring Barb's name up and say, remember how Barb talked about this. So it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind.
All right. With that, we thank you for your time, and we hope you're enjoying our class. If you have any comments, concerns, suggestions, with anything to do with this class, let us know. We're here for you guys. We're in the customer service industry. So, all right.
Okay. Have a good 3-day weekend.
Bye, guys.